Burnt Toast!
I'm your host, Todd Harold, and I sure appreciate you tuning in. That was a very long set of music. We got another long set of music coming up as well, and then we'll have an album spotlight. That last one was Gail Ann Dorsey. Actually, we started and finished the set with songs with Gail Ann Dorsey on them. She's a singer and bass player. For years, she played bass with David Bowie. The Sounding Joy holiday benefit from 2019. It was recorded at Levon Helm Studios in Woodstock, New York, better known as The Barn. It's not really a barn, but it started off as a barn, a very small thing. When we interviewed Tony Leone, he talked about that. But Levon Helm, because of health reasons, couldn't go out and tour anymore, so he just started having what he called midnight rambles at his home. And then that became a recording studio, sort of like Daryl's house, Daryl Hall's situation. But this was recorded on December 11th, 2019. That's a song written by Donny Hathaway and Leroy Hudson from the 1970 album by Roberta Flack, her first album called First Take. And that was a song called Tryin' Times, which I think is very appropriate these days. Gail Ann Dorsey on the vocals, Marco Benevento on piano, Jacob Silver on the acoustic bass, Daniel Littleton on the guitar, Fred Berman on the drums, and Clem Waldman on percussion. A great vocal there from Gail Ann Dorsey. Going up the playlist. Next is Micaiah McCraven, the great drummer, arranger, producer from Chicago, from his album called In This Moment from 2015, which was the first album I heard from him. Great double album where he he recorded everything live and then uses loops and samples to sort of manipulate those recordings. This was called Nawa. Micaiah McCraven on the drums, percussion, and the loops, Junius Paul on the acoustic bass, and Justafon Thomas on the vibes and percussion. Interesting story on that one. When I went to see Herbie Hancock and Kamasi Washington in 2019, after Kamasi Washington played, and we were waiting for Herbie Hancock to come on, this was in Detroit, they played that song, which is 2 minutes long, over and over and over for an hour and 10 minutes between acts.
Over and over and over again. Because that's what hell is all about, Robbie. Repetition.
And so it was a very long time before I could listen to that song again. So this is a personal triumph for me. I have no idea why you would do that. I was actually looking around to see if anyone else noticed that this was the same 2-minute song for an hour and 10 minutes, but I don't know. I guess they were testing people to see if they were actually paying attention. I was annoyed. Before that, we heard something from Flea's new album called Honora that's coming out in a couple of months here. That was a track called Traffic Lights that featured Tom York from Radiohead on the vocals, the piano, and the synthesizer. That was Flea on the bass and the trumpet. Tom York, as I said, on the vocals, piano, and synth. D'Anthony Parks, who I know from his work with Michelle Indeggio-Cello on the drums. Jeff Parker on guitar. Great Chicago-based guitarist who's done a lot of really great stuff, including, well, he's with the band Tortoise, he's played with Micaiah McCraven, and he's done several solo things. Nathaniel Walcott on the electric piano, Mauro Refusco on the percussion, and Josh Johnson, also a person who's played with Michelle Indeggio-Cello on the alto saxophone, among many other people. Before that, we heard Nora Jones from her Nora Jones is Playing Along podcast, which is very interesting. That was from 2023, a song called Why Am I Treated So Bad? I found that to also be reminiscent of a song from the first Roberta Flack album, which we're going to have to play some of here pretty soon, since I keep talking about it. But that was sort of, the bass line was very reminiscent of her version of Compared to What, the Eugene McDaniel song. That was Nora Jones on the electric piano and the vocals, Christian McBride on the acoustic bass, and Amir Thompson, Questlove, on the drums. Nora Jones, Why Am I Treated So Bad? Before that, Nona Hendryx from her album called Nona from 1983. There's a track called Transformation. She started off with the band LaBelle back in the early 1960s, and they had quite a bit of success in the 1970s, in particular with a song called Lady Marmalade. She began to write and become very involved in the creative process with that group. 3 singers, Patti LaBelle, Nona Hendryx, and Sarah Dash, and they did some very interesting albums. She was also involved with the Talking Heads. I believe she did background vocals on Remain in Light, and I know she's very involved in the album. The name of this band is Talking Heads, the live album that came out a couple years later. She's a noted LGBTQ activists, and this song is from 1983, and definitely discusses the idea that you can identify as whatever you want because everything is a transformation. It was written by Carol Pope and Kevin Staples, the duo that called themselves Rough Trade from Canada. They were definitely pushing the envelope at that time in the early 80s. Some cool stuff if you get a chance to hear it. Nona Hendryx on the lead and background vocals, Sly Dunbar, the great reggae drummer, on the drums, Stephen Scales from the Talking Heads on percussion, Wizard on the synthesizer, and Kevin Staples, the aforementioned Kevin Staples, on bass synth and guitar. Nona Hendryx, Transformation. Before that, Living Color from their second album from August of 1990 called Time's Up. They had won the Grammy for Best New Artist the year before. They had toured with the Rolling Stones. Mick Jagger is on this album, but then so is Maceo Parker and Little Richard and the avant-garde clarinetist Don Byron. So there's lots of interesting people on this album. They were definitely stretching out a little bit. That's a track called Love Rears Its Ugly Head. What a groove on that one. Some great drumming from Will Calhoun there. Muzz Skilling's on the bass. That was his last album with the band. After that, they replaced him with Doug Wimbish, who's been with them ever since. Vernon Reid, the leader of the band, on the guitar. And the unbelievable Corey Glover on the vocals, one of the great rock singers of all time, and I don't think he gets enough recognition for that. Living Color, Love Rears Its Ugly Head. Moving on up the playlist. Before that, we heard the Isley Brothers from their album called The Heat Is On from June of 1975. A huge hit for them, a track called Fight the Power. Before there was the Fight the Power in the 1980s by Public Enemy, there was Fight the Power by the Isley Brothers in 1975. It was their 13th LP. The story that I always tell, or I was told when I was on the radio, was that the older brothers, Ronnie, Kelly, and Rudy, had hits starting in the late 50s. And I mean, they had Shout was the original. We associate that with Otis Day and the Knights on Animal House, but that was the Isley Brothers. And It's Your Thing, many other hits. This Old Heart of Mine. Ronnie Isley, one of the great soul vocalists of all time, still doing it. Kelly and Rudy Isley, great background vocals there. And when they got to the 1970s, they wanted a harder edge, so they added their three younger brothers, who they had put through music school. Ernie Isley, in particular, gave them a whole new sound influenced by Jimi Hendrix, who had played with them in the 1960s, and Funkadelic and bands like that. But that was Ernie Isley on the guitars and the drums, Marvin Isley on the bass, and their brother-in-law, Chris Jasper, on the keyboards. The Isley Brothers, Fight the Power from The Heat Is On. Moving on further up in the playlist, we've got a little spoken word thing. Haven't done that for a couple weeks. Really into the spoken word thing. I hope you dig that too. That was Terence McKenna, recorded in the 90s, and there's a lot of stuff there that you can still hold on to. He was a philosopher and what we'll call a psychedelic ethnobotanist. He had a lot of theories. His lectures that you can find on YouTube are really fascinating, and he wrote some great books as well. But he was a maverick of sorts, Terence McKenna. That was Culture Is Not Your Friend. Gil Scott-Heron and Brian Jackson before that, from an album called It's Your World from 1976. That was a track called Must Be Something We Can Do. I thought that was appropriate for this week. Must Be Something We Can Do. That was recorded at Paul's Mall in Boston, Massachusetts, right around the bicentennial, 50 years ago, in July of 1976. Gil Scott-Heron on the vocals and electric piano, Brian Jackson on the keyboards, Victor Brown on the high vocal there. You don't get to hear a lot of albums where it's just where it's somebody other than just Gil singing, and Gil's one of the great singers. A very identifiable sound, but this with a harmony vocalist, that's a particularly interesting album. It's Your World, the name of the album. Must Be Something We Can Do, the name of the song. Before that, Curtis Mayfield, the one and only Curtis Mayfield, from an album called Back to the World in 1973, and that was a track called Future Shock that was later covered by Herbie Hancock. Curtis Mayfield on the vocals and the guitar, Phil Upchurch, who we featured a lot on this show, on the guitar, Lucky Scott, a great underrated bass player on the bass, Rich Tufo on the guitars, Henry Gibson on percussion, and Quentin Joseph on the drums. Some really great players out of Chicago. Curtis Mayfield, Future Shock. Before that, another kind of protest song, a single from 2017. Who was in power at that time? Anyway, that's Dumpsta Funk with Justice Ivan Neville, the son of Aaron Neville, on the keyboards and the vocals. Ian Neville, the son of Cyril Neville, on the guitar. Nick Daniels on the bass and the vocals. Tony Hall on the bass and the vocals. That's right, 2 basses. They're a double. Alvin Ford Jr. on the drums. Trombone Shorty, Troy Andrews, joining them on the trombone solos and the horn section. Some really cool playing on that song and a really cool message. Dumps to Funk, Justice. And at the top of the list tonight for set number 1 is David Bowie from his album called Earthling that came out in February of 1997. It was his 21st LP. He was dabbling with electronica and influenced by electronica and industrial music at that time, and it really shows. And that was a track called I'm Afraid of Americans. David Bowie on the vocals, the guitar, the samples, and the keyboard. Great guitarist named Reeves Gabrels on the guitars and synthesizers. Mark Plotty on loops, samples, and keyboards. Gail Ann Dorsey, told you, on the bass. Zach Alford on the drums. And Michael Garson, who was with David Bowie for a very long time. He was a member of the Spiders of from Mars, I believe. I believe he was, on the keyboards. David Bowie, I'm Afraid of Americans. Tonight's show, as every Burnt Toast show, is sponsored by Premier Chiropractic, 7113 West Jefferson, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Dr. John McDonald. That's right, the Burnt Toast show is sponsored by Dr. John. So let's talk about Dr. John for just a second. I've been going to chiropractors since the 1980s because I play drums and I play drums all the time. And I'm going to be 62 soon. And I also sing, which is a very physical thing to do. And I teach drums and I practice a lot as well. So there's lots of drumming going on. And so I have issues with my back, and especially the left side of my neck. And John always fixes that. I have middle back problems. Sometimes my left hip goes out. Sometimes it's my hands. He knows just what to do. My shoulders, my neck, my hand. I sound like I'm a mess. And you know what? I am. I'm a mess. I admit it. And John takes care of me all the time. So, and there's my feet, of course, and he's done a lot for those too. Matter of fact, just kind of the whole deal. John, can you help me? That kind of thing. So, and he always does. And I've seen him help a lot of other people too while I was in the waiting room. So, but not for long. I've never had to wait too long for John. It's a really great, affordable walk-in clinic. He's done miracles for me. He's kept me active and playing for a long time. So I owe John a lot. And I hope that you'll go and visit him. When Bob Weir passed away, we posted a few things on Facebook. But I wanted to make sure that I did a proper tribute to Bob Weir on the show, because that's a cultural icon. And what was it, 1963, when he heard Jerry Garcia playing banjo, waiting for his student to show up, and knocked on the door, and there was Jerry and Bobby. They went through a lot, and he really represents a lot. They represented to me the link between the beatniks and the hippies, the psychedelic era. And there was no band that was more psychedelic than the Grateful Dead. Originally very closely associated with Ken Kesey's acid tests that went around in the Bay Area for a while in the middle 60s, when they were the Warlocks and then became the Grateful Dead. Bob Weir was there for all of that. And he was still playing. I believe his last gig was last July. And we'll miss Bob Weir and his spirit and his iconography very much. I think that we don't get to see individuals like that anymore. And so I want to start off with something. We've got some Bob Weir, we've got some Grateful Dead, because he did so much. Yeah, I mean, if you've been on social media, he was just everywhere. I mean, it was like he did every gig with everybody and got his picture taken with them. And I you don't realize sometimes until someone passes just the incredible effect they had on the culture, what a huge part of the culture he was. Accolades go to Jerry Garcia. Bob Weir wrote great songs, and we're going to feature some of those in this next set. We're going to start off with his band Rat Dog from their only LP called Evening Moods, and we're going to play a track called To Gin. This came out in September of 2000. We're going to hear Bob Weir on the lead vocals and rhythm guitar, Jeff Chimenti on the background vocals and keyboards, Mark Karan on the lead guitar and background vocals, Jay Lane on the drums and background vocals. Jay Lane was with Bob Weir for a very long time, and he was with Dead and Company after Bill Kreutzmann decided he didn't want to do it anymore. So Jay Lane was on Bob's last gig. And Rob Wasserman on acoustic bass. They're joined by Eric Crystal on saxophone, who I believe now plays with Boz Scaggs, Mickey Hart from the Grateful Dead on percussion, and Mike McGinn on guitar. So we're going down the playlist now. Rat Dog with Two Gin. An album that I think is better than people give it credit for, an album called Go to Heaven that came out in April of 1980, the Grateful Dead Go to Heaven. From the second side, we heard two songs stuck together. Two songs both written by Bob Weir and John Barlow. Really cool songs, Lost Sailor and Saint of Circumstance. That was Brent Midland's first album with them. So that was Bob Weir, Jerry Garcia, Brent Midland on the keyboards, Phil Lesh, and Bill Kreutzmann and Mickey Hart. The Grateful Dead with Lost Sailor and Saint of Circumstance. Bob Weir with his group Bobby and the Midnights from their self-titled album from 1981. And that was a cover of a Heptones song, Book of Rules. Bob Weir playing some very authentic one-drop reggae there. The Heptones did that in 73. Weir and Bobby and the Midnights covered it in 81. Bob Weir on the lead vocals and rhythm guitar. Brent Midland from the Grateful Dead on the background vocals and keyboards. Billy Cobham on the drums. There's some amazing video of Billy Cobham playing with Bob Weir, and he plays just like Billy Cobham. He's got all these drums, and anybody else would have played ticky boom, and Billy goes because he's Billy Cobham, man. From the Mahavishnu Orchestra, his solo album Spectrum. We've played a lot of Billy Cobham. Alfonso Johnson, who was the bass player with Weather Report for a while. Later he played with a group called Jazz is Dead. I believe he's still with that group. And they do jazz versions of Grateful Dead songs. Yeah. Bobby Cochran on the lead guitar and background vocals. Matt Kelly on the harmonica and background vocals. Although I didn't hear any harmonica on that song, he is credited on that album. So I want to make sure that he gets his due. I'm your host, Todd Harold. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Burnt Toast!